Welcome to New Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and today we're going to talk about something that maybe some of you have heard about before. We're going to talk about the psychological impact of feminism, and I'm glad today that we can talk about this, and I'm talking today with Hannah Spier about it. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to hear my name pronounced correctly.
Yes, we talked about this before, but you have a very typical Dutch surname, so that makes it quite easy to pronounce for me.
Yeah, my husband's family is from Holland, but it's always pronounced in different ways around the world. So that was very nice. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, what's the most common pronunciation of the name? I'm quite curious now.
Well, it ranges from Spire to Speer.
Yes. The more you know, but maybe for those people that don't know you, you are like a psychiatrist who focuses on feminism, you could say, which is for people that don't know, quite unusual to focus more on the critical side of feminism. We're going to hear all about that today, but before we do, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background for those that are listening.
Right. So I was born and raised in Norway, and then I studied medicine. And I married a Swiss Dutch man and came here to Switzerland 10 years ago. So I started the residency in psychiatry in Norway, and then I moved here and continued here. And then I also, while working, I did a degree in cognitive behavioral therapy, so psychotherapy at the University of Zurich over 3 years. And now I'm a stay-at-home mom. So I quit my hospital job when I had my first kid. So 7 months in, that's when I had this journey that I think we'll get to, right? So this, where I started to realize that things weren't the way that I thought it was. And then I changed our whole lifestyles. I told my husband, I'm not, I'm quitting my job. So we're going to figure this out somehow. So he completely stepped up and took responsibility, and we now live a very traditional life, and it's much more harmonic. It's much more peaceful. And so then I started after 2 years after that, then I started writing, and because I looked back and I thought, okay, so this is the problem.
It's very interesting that it came to you, you could say, as part of your life experience to begin with. So maybe let's start there. Can you explain to me what you mean exactly by, okay, you were having a child and then it kind of became clear to you, if I understand, that the way that you were thinking about, let's say, maybe male-female relationships beforehand was different from what you think now? Well, what's kind of the transition that you made throughout this time up until now?
Right, because growing up in Norway is the feminist utopia, right? It's the feminist superpower, I like to call it. And so I also I shared these egalitarian values, and I had lots of ambition. I was a career woman. I had this vision. This wasn't even a dream because I was on my way there. And it was the vision I wanted to lead. I wanted to be head of a department in psychiatry by the age of 31. It was very specific. And I was heading right there. And then as I was pregnant, I had this fight with my husband. And I remember the hate of the unfairness. Why do I have to pause my career? Why do I have to take maternity leave, and why can't you? And I was very upset. And I think that's something that a lot of women recognize. This why do I have to? It's so unfair, and I have to be pregnant and go through all of this, and you can just continue like nothing affects you. And then I had my child, and that just disappeared overnight. All that ambition, it just stopped meaning anything at all. That was been such an important part of my life, that ambition and that dream. And then with my first child, it was just that all the biological realities just hit me like a tidal wave. And then I just started to realize a couple of things, right? That I'd been lied to. If this ambition that was so important to me, if that could just disappear, maybe it's just a tower of clouds. And that's how I see it now, that the more you climb this tower of cloud that is made by feminism, you're going to hit the ground at some point and develop psychological distress. And depending on how far you've climbed, it's going to be worse for you. And so luckily I was still in my 20s. Because I finished early. I was 25 when I finished med school and I started working. And then I quit pretty quickly after that, got married. And so when I had my first child, I was 28. So I could still change my life. But I've sat with so many women in their 30s and later where that's no longer a viable option. Okay, they don't have a lot of viable options. And then you are left, because people, when they come to psychotherapy nowadays, they don't really have psychiatric disorders. They have life problems. They have boxed themselves in by their past choices.
In general, I do think we see an increase in, let's say, lifestyle therapy, to call this. But of course, there are still people out there with serious psychopathology. You still have people with schizophrenia out there, with serious personality disorders. Just for people to know that that's not what you're saying. But
it's not what I'm saying.
No. Just but to clarify that. Maybe before we dive into this, maybe it's good also to start with the definition of what feminism actually is, because we are now talking about feminism. Everybody has an ideal feminism, but what actually is feminism to you?
Well, feminism is a movement that always, if you go back to feminism didn't start in the 1960s. It started in the 1800s with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So if you go back to her Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, you already there see that it was about females' moral superiority and the hatred of men, this pathologization of masculinity. And that's continued, and it echoes in all feminist writings. I mean, then you have Betty Friedan in the 1960s who wrote that housewifery is a comfortable concentration camp. And so this was never a benign movement that simply went wrong in the 70s. This was always about freeing women from what, like they call it women's liberation, from what? From their family obligation and responsibilities. But with that, they took away the essence of femininity. And by that, I mean our sacrificing for our families, for our kids. That's the essence of our femininity. It is that nurturing and nesting that satisfies us. It's something that we require for our psychological health. And you see that now when we take that away from women, we suffer. We suffer psychologically. We need to nest and nurture. We need to make that home for the people we love. And that's what they wanted to free us from. That's the women's liberation, as they call it.
All right, let me just to play devil's advocate, because of course, I'm also, of course, we're from the Netherlands. There are going to be many people listening that might think that at least some feminism that is good, and I would argue that I think that one of the primary arguments that you will get is, okay, maybe there have been quite some extreme views in feminism, but people also associate with feminism with a right for women to vote, for example. Also with the right that women later in life actually can work. And I think that most people in at least Dutch society would say, no matter if they're on the left or on the right, that this is at least some net good that came out of feminism. And I'm curious how you would respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you really go back and look at that history, the suffragettes, they were terrorists, right? They were bombing. They were going around behaving like the mafia, saying that if you don't support us by putting our signia in your window, we'll break in your small business. We'll break your windows, right? And they were if you go and you see when you got the vote, it was with the First World War, when the women stepped up and took responsibility. It was really after that that started to happen. And you see the time from all men. I mean, it wasn't like all men had the vote for 100 years and then suddenly, and the women were just stuck. Right? It was at the time in a lot of countries when women got the vote, there were still a lot of men that didn't have. Right? It was about, the vote was about, it was called the bullet, the ballot of the bullet, right? Because men had to go out and die in war. So the voting was about having a decision in that. When do I have to go and die for my country? And whatever you might say, women didn't have that. And in response, the feminists would say, yeah, well, if women were in power, there wouldn't be war. Well, look, we've had the vote now for how many years? And there's still a lot of war. So this isn't true. That's a sort of sleight of hand that they did. Well, if we were in power, then there wouldn't be war. We know that that's not the case. So I'd say to that was a development that would have come without the ideology of feminism. If you look at the feminists, they were all privileged middle upper class women, right, fighting because they had a resentment towards the men in their class. So you just go and look at what they're writing. It was never about women's rights. It was about their own envy.
It's an interesting point, and something that you're pointing out. If you take, for example, the Netherlands, there's only a 3-year difference between general voting rights for men and women. This was like 1917 for men and 1920 for women. So I agree with you. This is quite close. I guess it was just important to bring this up. Of course, you can make many arguments about the historical complexity, but I do think it's good that you're pointing out that there is a lot of radical ideas within this movement long before we had, let's say, third or fourth wave of feminism. I guess another claim that you were making that it's good to investigate is that, let's say, feminist belief and the feminist lifestyle, if I can say it like this, is bad for the mental health of women. That's basically one of your primary claims, I would say.
If you look at what the feminists are fighting for now, it still isn't women's rights, right? They're very unconcerned with women who are suffering in the world at large. Right? If you look at we just had Women's Day, Women's International Day. And what are they then? What are they fighting for? They're definitely not fighting for the 12-year-old Afghani girls who are whipped publicly because they don't satisfy their husband's sexual desires, right? They're 12 years old. That you don't hear feminists screaming about that. You hear about the rights of LGBTQ or whatever. It's about a very small subset of women, and they're fighting for their own egos in that class, right? They want to fight for affirmative action. Why do rich liberal women need affirmative action, right? I've worked in the district in Switzerland. I've worked in the district in Norway. They don't want affirmative action. They want to stay home with their kids, like they're florists, they're cashiers. They want to stay, they want their husbands to have a decent salary so that they can stay home with their kids. And they tell me that they don't want daycare solutions.
It's an interesting point, and I would say, again, to play devil's advocate so you can lay out your argument, most women, from my experience, kind of want at least the option in specific situations to, for example, go to work, not go to work. I do think that many women, at least now I see, of course, I have my own young child. I see the situation with when my wife is around other women in this life stage. Of course, many of them want to stay at home, but I also see some that don't. And we can argue whether that's good for them, good for their children. I definitely have my opinion about that. But what would you say then to women from this feminist point of view that say, okay, maybe in general, it's not good for women, especially when you have young children, to leave them with strangers in a daycare and to just go to work. But at least I want to live in a free society where it is an option if I want to or if it's necessary.
I totally get this argument. I hear it a lot. And it's never about, taking women out and into the home forever, right?
Mhm.
You can, but now we're choosing careers where you can't leave it even for a second out of fear of falling out. So it's about
Mhm.
a couple of things. It's about what we choose as a career, that you can't do it piecemeal.
Yes.
And that you then feel stuck. I get that. And then it's about having completely lost the sense of what our kids need. And for me, it's just getting back to, because none of these concerns are, when we're talking about men's rights,
Yes.
right? We're not talking about, I'm just so tired of always hearing about how we need to fulfill women's every whim and desire, right? Our femininity is about thinking about our children. And for them, being in a daycare is very damaging. We know that kids have a higher cortisol level who are in daycare than who are home with their mothers. Right? We see the dramatic rise in different mental disorders, not just anxiety and depression. I'm talking about cluster B disorders, not from social media started, but from the 90s, from when we shoved all women into the workforce. You see this very clearly in Norway, for example, that this already started in the 90s. So we know it's not good for kids. We know women are suffering, and all we're hearing is still, well, what about women, and how can we fulfill their every desire, right? How can we make it right for them? But how can we make it right for the family as a whole, so that children and men also come out of this decently?
It's a fair point, but I think maybe we even need to take a step back, because you're already making the assumption, which I personally also agree with, but many people that would call themselves feminists would not, is that there is a significant importance for people, but especially also for women, to have a family life. I think you see the articles and the statistics going up. Of course, we have now, let's say, a negative birth rate below the replacement level in all European countries. We see more and more women that call themselves childless by choice. We see this happening all over Europe, and in general also in North America. So then the question becomes, from their perspective, okay, this all applies if I would have children. And then maybe you could make an argument, but I don't want children to begin with, so I'm going to just focus on my career and let the family life be for someone else. How would you respond to this kind of typical feminist claim?
Yeah, well, first of all, if that's your claim, then what's your problem? Then you are free to climb that hierarchy and, Gesundheit, have fun. But I'm just saying that they also end up in front of me eventually, because we have numbers showing how the women who are childless are unhappy about it, 90%. And of course, I have met women for whom motherhood isn't a calling. They have a very specific personality structure, right? They're very highly conscientious and ambitious, and very low in agreeableness, low in neuroticism, that these traits that are usually higher in women, and they never have that interest, right? They're much more masculine in their personality structure. I've met these women, but they will be the first ones to say, this is not a life I would have chosen for me. This is not a life I wish on anyone. And they are very few and far between. And a lot of women now, because of feminism, are led to believe that they are one of this very small subset, but that is very rare. And in the end, you can say that you're happy and childless as you are 30. Then by the time you're 40, you're lonely, and you're going to realize that something is wrong. You have unmet maternal needs, unmet attachment needs, and you develop burnout, depression. Suddenly they look up and they say, this promotion I just got meant a lot more when I was 27 than it does now. Right? And then all the things that gave you positive emotion, that dopamine kick, the promotion after promotion, it suddenly doesn't give you that kick anymore. Suddenly you don't develop those positive emotions. And that's when that depression or that the fatigue sets in, because the energy are where we get our motivation from, that's then gone.
It's a persuasive way of thinking. I have two questions where I'm curious at. I'm curious, of course, if you look at mental health care, I also have a background in mental health care, and I would say that this kind of opinion is rather rare, especially in more progressive countries where we're both from, even though we're from different countries. So how does the let's say the medical field, but also the mental health field, how do they respond to the kind of claims you're making? And second of all, how do women actually that you talk to respond? Because I can assume that these claims, no matter if you agree or disagree, can bring up a lot of emotions with people, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But a lot of women, they show relief when they're told, when I tell them these things, because they know there is such a thing as inherent knowledge. It resonates with them if they're at a point where they want to accept it, right? Where they need a change. But a lot of women, they know that they're also at a point where they can't make any changes, right? They're so stuck in their way, and it's painful. It's mentally very painful to change your whole worldview, right? Like I did. That's why I'm saying I'm glad I did it when I was still 20, because it's very difficult to do, to change your whole mindset like that, to think that, okay, all these things that I built my life on, they were a lie, because I need to change the way my beliefs. That's a very difficult thing to do.
Of course.
But I am approached by a lot of women who say, like, I had 3 therapists before, but they're all just, I'm not getting I'm not getting further. I'm not getting better. And I need something else. So that I hear actually a lot. And then you have like the community, the mental health community. Like just right now, I'm following a German psychologist, head psychologist, who wrote about this in his book and gave interviews to the Neue Zürcher Zeitung and Die Welt, huge papers about how young left women have more mental disorders than conservative women, which is something that we know. That's not, that's not just his opinion. So he was talking about this, and he's in danger of losing his job. They are hounding him as we speak. Yet to have legal counsel, and so the only reason that I can say the things that I'm saying is because I'm not employed anywhere. It's because I do work privately, right? And I have more women approaching me that I can handle, because I am a proud housewife, a proud stay-at-home mom. What I'm writing, that's just a hobby. That's not something that's really just a hobby. Or the way that I look at it is that women were always involved in local government. They were always involved in their schools. They were always involved in charity. And so that's how I look at Psychobabble, at my podcast. So, but you would think that I'm just getting what's it called, rejections, right? That I'm just getting people being upset, but that's not it, because women are hungry for this. They know something is wrong. They know they've been lied to.
It's interesting that you say that, because I would say definitely in the day and age where we're now talking about, in 2025, you see more and more, especially young people, I would say, if you look at the data, who are actually maybe turning more towards a conservative lifestyle, both men and women, although it's still more men than women. If you actually look at there's an increasing gap between the way that women and men want to live, where men are turning much faster conservative than women are at the moment. So then I have a question, what you think about this moving forward. We already see that if people have mental problems, it's very hard for them to form any stable relationship, especially romantic ones. We already see that young people have a harder time actually finding partners, forming families and marriages. What do you think that the near future for these relationships forms in the West?
Hmm. Hmm. The future of people's relationships?
Yeah, because you're saying, look, feminism has a negative impact on women, but by that, of course, it also has a negative impact on their relationships and how they can actually form relationships. We're clearly seeing this already in the data. So,
Yeah.
do you see it turning around because from what you're saying, it's much more positive about women who are actually discovering, you could say, this non-feminist way of living, but when I look at the data, I see that still the gap between men and women is still widening. So are you hopeful that we actually are able to change this around?
Yeah, I think that we are obligated to have hope, because if we say okay, we lost to feminism, we're giving up on humankind. We have to battle feminism to have a future, because we are seeing a population collapse, especially in the West, but really globally, we are seeing a population collapse. And I lay that at the feet of feminism, because the problem is, and you see if you watch the documentary of Stephen Shaw, Birth Gap, right? Birth Gap. He points to this as a global trend, and the problem in every country is that women are childless by 30, right? And now we have, like you mentioned before, and why are they childless by 30? Because they have built their life on feminist lies. So we have to, but that, I mean, if I didn't have hope, I wouldn't be doing any of this.
That's a fair point. And what would you say is a good way to debunk these lies? Of course, in this conversation, I'm trying to play a bit of the devil's advocate, so we can debunk some of them. But in general, what do you think has been, in your experience, the most persuasive way to make especially women realize that this feminism is actually not in their best interest?
Yeah, it's to get to them when they have that first child. That is, I think, that is, and start teaching people really about the feminist movement, because we are really under this misconception that it's this benign thing, that it was always about freeing women and women's rights, and no, they were terrorists. And I think that this development of voting rights and having women contribute in society in a different way, that development would have happened regardless of this ideology of resentment, which is what feminism is. And it seeps into us. We sow the seeds of that resentment from the kids, from women, from little girls. The first time they put on their first tight stockings, what do we tell them? Yes, the world is unfair to women. Why do I have to wear these tight pantyhose and my brother doesn't? It's because you just have to get used to the world being unfair to women. Right? We start when they're that small. This resentment, it was never about women's rights. It was about hatred of men. And that's what's between men and women still today. It's just now they cloak it in sort of pseudo religious language and finding themselves and all that nonsense.
And would you say that there is a place for advocacy for women's rights in a non-feminist way? Because like you're saying, there's still women to this day, you talk about Afghanistan, who are treated terribly by any stretch of the imagination. And I would personally say it would be good if these women would not be stoned if they literally speak. And
that would be great. That would be great.
This is literally the law right now nowadays in Afghanistan. Of course, there are many countries in, let's be honest, mostly in Africa and the Middle East that don't have much with treating women in a fair or dignified way.
I think if feminism was really about what feminists claim it is, they would be fighting immigration. That's where the focus would be. Because, they're so compassionate and they're so nice. What about compassion towards the rape victims? I mean, in Norway, we've seen a huge rise. Like now, when I go to Oslo, I can't go certain areas for fear of that. And you see, Germany is much worse. Sweden,
Yes.
lost, rape capital of the world. So what, can feminists talk about that? That's just, the hypocrisy reveals what feminism is really about. It's about furthering a very small subset of already very privileged women.
I think that is it's a good point that you're making, because actually I was writing today about the fact that there's this, they call themselves a right-wing feminist group in France called Nemesis. I don't know if you've heard of them, but this is exactly what they are advocating for. They're advocating for, we need to do something about immigration, for actual female rights to be able to go walk safely in the streets, not get raped by people. And they during the Women March in Paris, they even got they needed police force to actually protect them from the left-wing feminists, to call it like this.
Oh, they were at ARC, no? I
Sorry?
think they were at ARC, no? At the conference.
I'm not sure if they were at ARC, but I just saw that at the International Women's Day. This is literally what happened. People were trying to attack them, and some sadly succeeded for actually speaking out for what they call right-wing feminism. But I would just say it is common sense that you don't want your women to be raped in the streets.
I think we can get rid of this word altogether. I don't think there is such a thing as conservative feminism or reactionary feminism or, the religious feminism. It's just the way that it has seeped into all these different areas of our lives. You even see feminism in Orthodox religions. Just get rid of it. Which rights do I not have in the Western world? I mean, I'm asking you, which rights do I not have? I have more than that. What they mean when they say fight for women's rights, they mean fight for special consideration towards women. But the special consideration that women always got, that was because women sacrifice for the kids. Women make themselves vulnerable in their sacrificing for the kids. But now it's turned. When I travel with I have 3 small kids. When I travel with them alone, people are nasty. They are nasty to me. Oh, why do you have 3 kids if you can't handle it? Like, they tell me awful things instead of giving that consideration that you give to mothers in helping them child rear. Right? That's why men were dispensable in
previous
men
times.
were dispensable. Yes. And women weren't, because women are geared towards survival so that they can properly child rear. That's why we needed our grandmothers even in helping our child rearing, and men went off to war. But that's completely been perverted. So now that they don't even want to see women with children, and they tell you, oh, why do you go shopping at 5 o'clock when everyone else needs to go shopping? Like, stay at home with your kids. We don't want to see you.
That's bizarre. I'm sorry to hear that this is what you're going through. I must say that indeed in different societies, in more traditional societies, this is very different. I remember last year I went to visit some family in Uzbekistan, and this is a very traditional society. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, definitely not, but that's not my point. My point is that my wife's sister, she had a young child, and people did not even, men just automatically came when there were stairs to carry up the child, or the thing that the child was sitting in. In the Netherlands, you definitely, I hear from my own wife nowadays, when you ask men, they don't do it, and then in the end it's other women who are trying to help you bring your child up the stairs. So that's kind of a bizarre situation.
Yeah, not even them, honestly. It's a bit, but that's why they're sort of taking this affinity we have to care about women in pain. We have that natural affinity to care about women's pain. Female tears move men in a different way. And we know this now. There's some awesome studies showing how men react to female tears. There's something in the pheromones or the smell. They're not completely sure, but they have taken advantage of this this affinity, this moving us, and used it for their own gains.
I do think that's it's a good point to finish this conversation. I think we got the message across. I'm very curious what people will think about it. I'm curious if people want to follow what you have to say. Where could they do that?
Yeah, go to my Substack, hannahspear.substack.com. Listen to my podcast. It's called Psychobabble. It's a publication on Substack. It's also called Psychobabble. There I do articles as well as very interesting episodes and interviews with people. It's also very much about exposing bad therapy in mental health. So feminism is just a crown jewel of this liberal narrative that I think make people sicker.
Thank you very much for
having me.
Yeah, for making the time to talk about this. It's very important, like you're saying, and let's see how people respond. I also really want to thank all the listeners. If you want to make these kind of conversations possible, please consider becoming a member at nieuwrechts.nl or following us at the social media, and see you in the next one.
Thank you so much.